Click the button and then I do think it's probably worth like just starting with like who you are and why we're friends. Oh wait, here's a story for you. Do you
Okay.
remember that column that you made that was like had that was like wrapped in red rope?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my first memory of you.
Oh, really? That's so
Yeah.
funny. Yeah. That's actually a perfect example of like a place where my brain like short circuits around like basic logical things sometimes. It took me like a week to figure out how to tie like one knot. And then at some point I gave up and like asked our other friend that we went to school with to do it for me because I was
Hmm.
just like, ugh, like I can't like tie knots. It's like
But
you
wasn't
can't.
all that work about knots or something, or like you were using rope a bunch? I remember that.
Yeah, I was like, it was one of those things where I was like, this is such a beautiful, like formally such a beautiful thing. But I think the reason why I think it is beautiful is because it is somewhat unattainable to me. It is like
Oh
against my nature. And so
man,
it
I
is
think this explains like a lot of
practically.
your work now.
Oh yeah, I was trying to explain this to my friend Eleanor, who's like an incredible painter. She like she talks about how like it's nice to like go into her studio and like escape into her work and like ignore like the other parts of life that like suck. And I was like, I have the opposite relationship to making work. Like I feel that there is something that needs to be done, but I don't find my process like particularly joyful. Like
Yeah,
it's just what needs to be done. But I actually think that like it's just I guess it's just like more masochistic or something because it's like I feel like if you work for something and you like earn it, you appreciate it more. Like it's like running. It's like going for a run or like a difficult
sure.
bike ride, right? It's like I don't know. That sounds sort of like Randian, but whatever. Fuck it.
Wait, but
Like,
is that how you think about? We've actually never really talked about this before. I mean, like, I feel like I remember you thinking about like, or kind of feeling like, okay, look, I have no choice but to make creative work. But like, how do you? Here, well, let's talk about. Let's start here, maybe. Like, what do you? I actually don't really know what you're working on lately. So we
mm,
talked yesterday about talking about kind of like drawing as a general, like whatever, as kind of like a methodology, which I think is why we can ever even talk about Urbit at all. Um, but I don't really know what you're working on lately, and I'm curious, like what the like I don't know, like what the entry point is, and like kind of how you're thinking about it, or what your like kind of current like process is, and then we can figure out how to talk about computers too. Which I'm actually kind of curious also to even I was realized that after we spoke yesterday, I was thinking like, how do you even? I'm surprised you even care about this like digital stuff at all. But I mean, I think
oh, oh,
we
I
we can maybe get there. Anyway, what yeah, so what are you up to like lately actually?
um, well, I'm working on a show that I think is going to open next May or maybe a little bit after that. That tentatively titled Celestial Seasonings, like the tea.
Yeah,
but um, but it's basically like a suite of sculptures that are structurally identical, but like the ornament on each one changes based on what season that sculpture is. And then they
Okay.
have elements of them that are like these like polished bronze elements that either are like etched to be black and absorb light, or polished to reflect light. So it's sort of this um, basically like I realized in my last body of work, which was this like set of like zodiac sculptures,
Yeah.
that I think I'm I think I make structures because they're like what needs to be made in order to uh, display light and shadow. Like what I'm really interested in is like light and shadow and like that sort of like fundamental binary of like just perceiving and existing.
Yeah.
And so that was like a major breakthrough for me because I've been like toiling away making pretty physical like steel sculpture for the last like 10 years. And I thought that I had this relationship to the material because it was like it's like really it's really efficient at like defining a volume but with very little mass.
Yeah.
And
You mean
so
steel? Like you could just make something big and whatever. Like, yeah.
like a frame, like you can get the
Yeah.
most volume with like the least amount of uh mass. Like it's not like stone where it's like the
Yeah.
solid fucking shit.
Yeah.
Um so anyways, I thought that was maybe my relationship to the material, but then I realized that that really is just the result of me thinking about like drawing and like the 2D 3D relationship, and that's really where the light and shadow fits in, because in like the drawing space you basically take the very like complex and nuanced and sort of like quantum field thing that is like seeing in 3 and 4D, and you compress it into 2, and it becomes like a binary again. It's either like the mark
Okay.
on the page or the emptiness on the page or some combination, but at the end of the day
Yeah.
you're still left with this fundamental binary of like 0 1, light, dark, male, female, yin yang, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm getting closer to the thing, which is basically nothing. But
But wait,
getting
so in this case, you're because before, like the last body of work that we talked about a good amount, there was like this kind of whole conceptual framework around why, like the rationale for making what you were making as like this universe of references and systems and so on. So in
mm,
this case, are you thinking, it's like more of a formalist exercise, like you're able to think about it purely as something that you just want to make that is beautiful, or does it have like a kind
oh,
of conceptual?
yeah, it kind of does. I mean, basically, the other part of this work that it's still really murky because I've never done this before is I'm trying to make 4 fragrances that go with each sculpture.
Yeah.
And those are made of like botanicals that I can forage in the woods like a little witch, um, that are in season at the time. So they're not, I don't know how wearable they will be, but they're pretty naturalistic. Like they do smell like
Does that mean you
steak.
have to do it over the course of the year so that you have to get each one in the, yeah.
Yeah. So like it's been really busy because springtime is when like all the florals are good and stuff like that. Like the real like bangers, heavy hitters of fragrance are all like
Oh yeah,
going
that makes
off right
sense.
now. But anyway, so the fragrance element of it, I think, is partially what's driving the system of ornament that I've created for
Okay.
adorning each sculpture. So like the last body of work, there were 12 sculptures. Each one was like a sign of the zodiac, and then there were their planetary, their planetary rulership and their
Yeah.
modality and all these other astrological things. Like the shapes I chose were like derived from those alignments.
Yeah.
But since this is seasonality, it's more like in some ways it's like more empirical because I can like draw the ornament from that I use in the sculptures like literally from like plants around me. So
Yeah.
like the springtime one will have like ferns unfurling, or the summer one will have grass, like, you
Sure.
know, whatever. I was thinking a lot about just for like kind of an aesthetic reference, the Oxford Museum of Natural History that was like it's
As a
this
place?
yeah, it's a really cool
Oh,
building.
I remember. Yeah, yeah, yeah. People love to. This was a classic analysis project.
Yeah, that's
People
why I
love
know.
that one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So it's basically like, for those of you who don't know, it's like a Victorian building
That's
that's
it's a
like
super niche, like
it's
really. Yeah.
super
Anyway.
neat.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, my man Ruskin, not actually a fucking communist, but that's a different conversation. Um, he he was like a part of this group of like artists and designers and writers who were all like sort of commissioned to participate in designing the ornament for the inside of the Natural History Museum at
Yeah.
Oxford
Yeah.
in the like late 19th century. And they did in steel and in iron and maybe some bronze and stuff. They basically made like a Gothic revival space. So like the capitals on the
Uh-huh.
columns and stuff were like, instead of like traditional like clover shapes or like, like flamboyant like fire shapes and stuff that's like on, 14th century Gothic buildings, they would do like cattails and grass and like ferns and sort of like English countryside shit.
Yeah.
I think it's like an interesting moment in history, this sort of um dandy like weak men who like go around and like draw plants and like, write
They
Galen
did
poems.
love drawing plants.
Yeah, I feel like that maybe like those are my people. Like it is like really sneaky actually.
Wait, so that's the seed. You're just saying, looking at that period of history and the relationship between their observation of the natural world and then the way that they made work, like that's the seed of of inspiration, basically, or like just kind of like down that rabbit hole.
Um down, I guess, sort of like down that rabbit hole of like their poetic. I think they were really onto something where like about how like art and science and also like ethics, like law and all of these things are sort of
Huh.
um all towards the same end. Like they're
Yeah.
all about this like sort of like phenomenological freedom, that like if you can like develop your own sort of subjective but empirical system of
Uh-huh.
thinking, then
Uh-huh.
you're free to sort of like uh, tromp around in like this like transgressive land of pure form. You know what I mean? Like I think they
But
were
do you think
really
that was what, how is that like because they were able to be like well enough versed in those set of systems? Like that sounds like a kind of
so maybe.
oh, okay. Like that's like a period of history where there was a canon or like a way of ascending into that place of freedom or something. Is that what you're describing? Like you're saying that like this is a point at which someone was able to kind of like there's like a well-established foundation and then someone can you can become familiar enough with that foundation that like your the sort of degree of freedom that you have with respect to that like foundation or canon is like well understood.
Mm,
Or is that am I maybe I'm like
no, no, I don't think it's about like adhering to anything. It's about like observation as like the sort of like king above all else. Like real scientific thinking is actually like steeped in doubt. The whole point is doubt. That like you observe, and you like, I mean, I guess that's where I'm not a scientific thinker really, is because I like have belief, which always like overrides my ability to like observe objectively. But I think what these dudes were doing was like deeply observational in a way that like I don't see that sort of like practice existing artistically that much anymore. Like all the other artists, not
oh
all.
that's interesting.
I have a few friends who are great artists, God bless. But I would say the majority of people in the art world are just making this like hamster wheel of like art about the art world, about the
Oh,
internet
oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, I
world,
understand.
or
Yeah.
like about themselves and like their identity and like their like fucking
Yeah.
like personal experience of life. And like that's just like, I actually think it's cruel. I think it's like a cruel impulse, honestly,
To
because
themselves or to the rest of the world?
to the viewer,
Oh, oh, oh.
you know,
Because it just sucks us further down. Like it's just like it's just, you're just kind of like trapped into this feedback loop of
like trapped in their narcissism. It's just like you're
yeah.
just trapped in this like fucking reflexive thing, and it actually is like very, it's a trap. It's like it's like
That's
evil
interesting.
and authoritarian in that way. Whereas if you teach someone how to observe, right? If you're like an art teacher, which like I am not, but I would love to be one day. If you teach them how to observe instead of indoctrinating them into your
Yeah.
like personal system of ethics or the popular ethics of the day or whatever,
Yeah.
like I shouldn't say ethics, morals. If you
I
like
understand. Or
morally
way of
educate,
thinking. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
like you, you're not actually giving them the tools to be free. You're like shackling them to like society. And the whole point of being an artist to me is to just be like fucking free. Like I decided not to decide a very long time ago. I don't ever have to decide what I want to be like when I grow up because I will never grow up and I will always be this.
But wait, you're making the argument that the art itself should be also liberating. You're saying that the
Yeah.
thing that you make should, be a tool through, or should like shift your lens of thinking because
Yeah.
you can understand the relationship between the world as it exists and the way that the work is sort of representing some existent phenomena, whether it's a natural phenomenon or
Hmm.
not, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that I definitely agree with. But yeah, and I always thought of you as basically like being, it seemed to me like your process was mostly to kind of like find both a phenomenon and then a system through which, like a lens through which to kind of project that phenomenon, right?
Hmm.
Like you're like, there's kind of like something that exists in the world and then some way of like whether it's a system of building things or whether it's like a literal thing that you'll like look through or whatever that will like where you can actually see these two like component parts in relationship to one another. Like this is the thing that I am referencing that we all know exists, and then you can sort of see the way through which it was transformed. Do you think that's true, or is that not true?
Yes, I do think that's true. I think you're right. I think the only thing I would add to that is that like there's all other types of like instrumentation and like devices. I mean like measuring equipment basically that already can do that, but those things are engineered and what I think the artist can bring to that conversation is like something harmonious. I mean, this is like maybe where I go down a path of like deep conservatism is that I actually do really value beauty. And I think that like the artist can present like a poetic or harmonious like way of seeing what you just described. Whereas like, you know, to like engineer like a tool or a device or an instrument to whatever, measure light, measure tectonic movement, measure sound, measure whatever. Like that kind of stuff can be done by a different type of thinker. Like I think the human being is like pretty genius actually and is like good at like trying to figure out like what things are and like where that comes from and why that happens. But the artist brings to it this sort of like sweet and retarded like musical element to it, like it's
Sure. I understand that. I mean, I think that makes sense, but I still think the way that you're talking about making work, or the way that I described it, which you accepted, but I'm not sure if you totally agree. But I do think you're pretty disciplined about the separation between the kind of universe of references and the thing that is going to kind of project, like be the plane of projection of like that like corpus of content or something. And I don't think that most artists are thinking in that way. And then I think because that's true, uh, then the the whole like a conversation around like whether or not something is beautiful or why it is beautiful gets muddied because the content of so much self-referential artwork is like it's kind of like poisoned at the outset because it's so deeply entangled with like issues of whether something is right or wrong or good or bad, or like
yeah,
it overlaps with like all these other things in the world that you can't really think about it in a purely like formalist sense.
yes,
But you're saying that the primary role of the artist, I think maybe another way to say it would be the primary role of the artist is basically to come up with like formal innovations, like new ways of seeing things. And the
yeah,
criteria for that innovation is that they are beautiful, basically, like that they are moving in some fashion is like hard to measure, but you know it when you see it.
yes. And I think that the like I always tell myself when I'm measuring things that like measurement is the most intimate thing you could do, right? Because you're trying to, when you measure something like with a compass or whatever, you're trying to get to as close to the zero as you can. Like it's this like intimate, like almost like loving gesture. You're like, I want to get like
Yeah.
so close to like
Yeah.
zero.
Yeah.
And like um the kind of the idea that you could try and have that like intimacy of, or like measuring around like the beauty or like this sort of non-quantifiable purely qualitative form of something,
Yeah.
it seems like this infinitely elusive thing to like go
Mhm.
after, you know,
Yeah,
it
I mean,
just
do
seems
you think, but do you
like
think about it in terms of, like, I mean, how do you do, I mean, it's one thing to, well, okay, maybe, but are you measuring that purely yourself?
I mean, that's a really good question. I guess I'm like
This is
um
the hardest question.
yeah,
Like, this is the question that I struggle with too. Like,
like rulers, like those numbers are somebody else's numbers, man. Which is why I like stopped using rulers a couple of years ago. I only use compasses now for almost everything.
yeah, but
Like it
that's
just,
like, but you work in metal, so like, that's,
it's possible, yes.
yeah,
But like I tried to relinquish, like in an attempt to basically become more precise and less accurate,
yeah,
I tried to release numbers from my vocabulary and just basically only rely on repeatability, which
yeah,
meant I had to like use a compass and like a story stick.
yeah.
And it is, yeah, but it still feels futile because
But I
I've
think, wait, I
tried.
think I don't know why, I'm surprised. I feel like your answer, or the answer of any artist in the way that you're defining this, is that you are the only critic, right?
Yeah,
Isn't the
small
claim
up.
basically like, I am the only one, the only thing that matters is that I like it, right? That I think it's beautiful. And then it doesn't matter really, ultimately, like what anybody else thinks, or is that not true?
It's not so much that it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's I know I'm right. I know I'm right. It's
Well,
just a
what's the
matter
difference?
of belief, I think. Like just
Oh, you're
blind.
saying like I'm not even gonna, it doesn't even cross my mind to think about what someone else might think because the only criteria is whether or not I am fully convinced. So if I'm convinced, it's good, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, because I guess in my like sort of self-contained little system where I'm like the only maker and the only critic and the only whatever, then but I don't know. I mean, people do get, I mean, you have people in your studio or like we talk about art and like I hear
Yeah.
what you have to say and it's inarguable that it wouldn't affect the work. It's hard to like there's
Yeah, but
times
it's just not formal. That's the difference between what you were talking about before, right? So it's like within, and actually, this is the crux of the difference probably between us, and definitely something I was very conscious of when I started to become more interested in making, only making things that is judged on in some measurable way by its success, kind of in the hands of someone else, right?
Mhm.
Like, can you have, concrete measurement of like how does this get used by someone else or how broadly or how much will they pay for it or whatever it is like
Mhm.
that yeah, there's a ruler. I'm like, yeah, I live by the, like, maybe I get to invent the ruler sometimes, but like the ruler has to be, or I get to pick the ruler because it has to be something, someone that there's some level of agreement across at least the organization you work with, but ideally the world, right,
Mhm.
around like what that criteria is, and then you're going to make something that's going to like live and die by that criteria.
Mhm.
um, and because I think, yeah, for me, my like primary frustration actually with a lot of the with like the environment that we went to school in really was that I felt like there was no cohesion around why something was better than something else. Granted, we're in different, on different floors or whatever, but like that was like the most frustrating thing to me was like, it's like, all right, look, we can say we're trying to make something that is beautiful, or we can say that we're trying to make something that is successful, or like on some measure, like we can decide what that criteria is, but let's decide on the criteria and aim at it. And I was like, nothing. You don't even, not only do you not know what the criteria is, you wouldn't know how to aim at it. Like, because there was
Mhm.
such a complete fracturing of like what it even meant for architecture to be successful, like in the modern world at all.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but
Yeah.
it's a reasonable answer from just creatively broadly, right? As an artist to say, well, look, it just, yeah, it has to be beautiful, and I get to decide if it's beautiful or not. Like that,
Well,
it's fine.
no, you bring up a really good point. I think that the thing that that makes it feel like the um what's the word? Sort of like the laws of, that you would judge beauty um by seem arbitrary, especially when you have like obviously like a lot of, let's say like 20 people in a critique and they all have like a like truly, you know, like
Yeah,
inarguably unique perspective on existing. But I think the most empirical thing I can think of is like is proof, like the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. And like if you know, like when you hit a tuning fork and it's just like ringing and you're like,
yeah,
okay, like we have hit the right thing. It's sort of like, I don't know. I mean, that's like the magical thing about like music and why it's like infinitely it's like infinitely interesting to just keep listening to Bach all the time, basically, because harmony is like this incredible system. And like when you really get it, when you like when it you fucking like do it and it really like rings, you're like you can't argue with this. It's like really
yeah.
beautiful. Like you know, like sometimes like nobody argues that like Bernini, like you know, Apollo and Daphne is not beautiful. No one would ever say it's not beautiful. I just don't think they would. Is there anyone? Someone would be like, it's not beautiful because like this is a story about two like old white people in like Western civilization or something, and they would come up with
I
some
think
like
that's
elaborate like reason for why it's like
well.
maybe.
There's some. That's fine. The first thing I think of actually is that I wonder if you ask someone who's like, whatever, born and raised in Vietnam, with no like, no art school education, like as a random example, I'm just saying someone without the cultural background. I do tend to think that beauty is a well understood thing within a cultural background. And that could be or a culture like, but it could be very broad. Like Western culture is like obviously pretty broad. Um, I wonder whether I mean it's interesting. I mean, like Walter Math would like agree with you basically,
Mhm.
or something. I think a lot. I mean, yeah, like it's like there's obviously across, or the argument you're making, and I'm saying I'm not 100% convinced, but I can see the argument, which is that yeah, there is a kind of universal cohesion in terms of like what it means to make something that is like formally like complete or beautiful or cohesive.
I think I may have just thought of the unifying theory. My Libran nature persists. Okay. I think that beauty is inherently okay, so like you're right, against across cultural differences, right? Like maybe someone in Vietnam thinks beauty is different than someone in California, which is different than someone in Mississippi, whatever. But the point is that beauty is exceptional by definition. And so it's that idea of like aspiration, like that you aspire to it, that is like the one definition of it that we can all agree on, right? Like that's what's wrong to me with like I'm not trying to go down like a political path. I'm really not. But like this idea that like all the models can be like, okay, like here's a model who has like a fupa, and here's a model who has skin disease, and here's a model who is morbidly obese, and here's a model who is 80 years old. This idea that like everyone is beautiful is not true, because beauty by definition is exceptional.
Well, that's like that's different. Like
That you can
I don't think
find
that's a good.
that you can find relatively, like you can be like that.
Well, I would argue in that case actually like it's like look if I was 80 like I mean and it's even true in some ways as I feel like as I get old that one's a funny one because I feel like anyway like if I was 80 I would look at the 80-year-old model and like you'd feel like you'd like be excited and validated but it would be beautiful to you within the scope of so this is I wish I could remember you're reminding me of the like out so the Christopher Alexander's thesis right notes on the synthesis of form like I just feel like when I read that I like bookmarked I was like oh this is the best formulation of this of the idea that we're grasping at, which is basically where he comes up with this whole mathematical model, which is just like something that is beautiful is a synthesis of its basically sighting, like it's of the constraints of its sight, right?
Mhm.
Like, so basically, like it responds with, it has appropriate fitness to the place that that it exists, right? So that's why for me, it's like, well, like the interesting thing about the expansion of like what it means to be beautiful is that it's just trying to like hit all these different niches, right? Like, which it does may not hit for you, but like it hits for somebody else. And that's like a hard thing in a really multipolar world where there are a lot of different, there's all kinds of different stuff going on, you know? And it's sort of like it is actually somewhat, that one feels pretty subjective. But I think this idea of the idea of fitness to me always like work. Like I'm like, oh, that's actually like that may be relatively universally true. That like something has a certain fitness to its context. And in the case of the Bernini sculpture, right, its context is, I do think you can't read that outside of basically like ancient Rome, or you know, like that's like its fitness is also, if that just like landed out of nowhere, right, with a different set of cultural like history, you know, from Mars, some ancient sculpture arrives. Like, do you read it the same way? You know, I don't know. Um,
I don't know, maybe you don't know how to read it, but you can hear it and you can feel it and you can see it. I think that's the thing with these like um that also I think like the real beauty, which is extremely elusive, when you do achieve it, it is ineffable and really hard to discuss, which is why I find it um yeah, I'm not saying, I guess I'm not saying that like people, because like someone is like beautiful in a context where like everyone is, let's say, like obese, and then in another, like, but to me that is like not beautiful or something. I don't mean like the two people have different ideas of beauty. I just mean like beauty is not a thing, it's a direction, or like it's an action. You're like going towards beauty, like whatever it is. And this idea that you would just say that everything is that is this very like dead horizontal sort
oh,
of
okay. This is
non-moving.
kind of reminds me of like the difference between the beautiful and the sublime or something, and like that. Uh, uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You're just saying like the dumbing down of the exceptional makes it really hard to talk about what is truly exceptional.
Exactly.
Um,
The difference
yeah,
between quality and equality. If everything is equal, then they all have the same qualities, and quality does not
yeah.
exist.
But I mean, you're supposed to be, I mean, sure, but who cares, right? Because it's like the keepers, like you can also think of it even just in terms of the intellectual framework for quality, which is always also going to be a rare thing. So
Mhm.
to be able to even tell the difference is not something, if everyone could tell the difference, then that which was exceptional would be normal. Like it just doesn't, you know,
Mhm.
you can't, like, not everyone can kind of have great taste or say, like, just by definition, not like a, it's not judgment, it's just fact. Um, uh, and that's so totally okay too. But wait, all right, let's hold on. I want to talk. So I think it's interesting. One thing that's interesting that I'm surprised we've never talked about actually is this idea that, like, I do think that you described what I couldn't ever really do myself, but now I sort of, it makes changes my thinking about how, like, as an artist, you're like the pursuit of an understanding of some of what is beautiful, even internal, like even your own understanding of that is this like is an infinite challenge. Like that's something you can spend your whole life just trying to figure out, like for yourself, which is interesting, uh, because I think I would often look at that and just think that's an impossible problem. Like to me, I'm like, I want to solve problems. That's an impossible problem. Like, but
Mhm.
actually, well, it's a fruitful problem if you can continue to wrestle with it because you can make things that are moving. But the other thing that like is interesting to me there, and because I spend so much of my time thinking about how to make tools, is that you're always using some toolkit to do that, right? You have to pick like the tools both that you use to make the work, and then the work itself sets up like a framework for people to think within. And so I guess I'm sort of curious about like, and I do think you're pretty disciplined about like the separation of those two things. So like thinking about the way that you're going to go about like drawing or making something like in a pretty rigorous way, um, and like trying to separate that from like the content of what you're doing and kind of like preserve that as a practice. um, I'm curious whether you like think whether that's true for you, like whether you think, okay, I want to keep my the ways in which I draw or the ways in which I work in the shop or the way like that you have an idea of ideas about quality or precision or sort of beauty within the context of sort of drawing writ large, right? Like how do you think about making that process better? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. That is something that I find like so difficult. Like I always try to make my construction process feel more like in the beginning of a project when I haven't really started yet and I have a drawing which is like very pristine and it's sort of this like um tight little like code or like codex or key that I can follow with all of my little like kind of architectural conditions in the drawing that tell me where to cut this, where to weld that, where to put the bolts, blah blah blah. That when I take that into my studio before I've started building anything and touching anything, it's like soul crushing every time when I realize that this sort of like fetishized orderliness that I had about building stuff,
Mhm.
I can't achieve. I won't say it doesn't exist, but like I am incapable of achieving it. And
But does
it
that make you want to change the process by which you make your plans or not?
does it make me want to? I think it exemplifies my lack of maturity and that I don't want to yet. But but even though I don't want to, I have been doing it. And I think that was what I was going to say next is that I've been trying to get really into doing things in a way that I do not want to do because I think that that relates back to what you said about the artist being kind of like infinitely tasked with figuring out this one thing that like there to that end there is a sacrifice. There's like a lot of like there's some self-sacrifice there where it's like I wanted to like fetishize my process and like imagine myself like in my studio like doing things in a nice way and it being like beautiful, but actually it's like it's gross. I make mistakes. Like I like I'm constantly like injuring myself. I'm like sweaty, dirty, gross. I like it's like taking years off my life with my complexion for sure. Like there's also like yeah, it's just like sometimes you're like I'm going to use this magnetic drill press and like drill these holes in this perfect way and it's going to be like vertical like like I'm going to be like really like building things in space. Like I'm a little machine and like this is my erector set and it doesn't work out like that and you have to use like a shitty hand drill or you like buy a really fancy knife grinder because you think you're going to grind this stuff a certain way and then you're like fuck it, it actually works better with the angle grinder. And so then you start to accept the kind of like down in the mud like fucking just like down and dirty way that like I imagine ancient people actually had to build stuff where you're like the Egyptians did not have steel chisels, they had copper chisels and they got like two they like banged on it like two times and then it was dull and they had to throw it away and someone had to forge them a new one. So it was shitty, wasteful, clumsy, like that's where it gets interesting to me. I'm starting to finally make my peace with chaos, and I actually think I don't want to talk about feminism too much, but I do think I'm making my peace with womanhood in doing this, in like engaging with the truly chaotic nature that is the material universe.
Wait, what does that have to do with femininity? I don't know. We don't even have to answer that question if you don't want to, but I mean, like, just
Just that, like, I feel like, like the male the male approach, the Apollonian approach, is like supposedly like clear and orderly and linear and like goal based and like I have a task, I have a plan, this is the language around the plan and I'm going to use that plan to achieve my goals. And womanhood and femininity is like associated with sort of more dark, chaotic, innate sort of um
I mean,
yeah,
I feel like what
innate
you're describing is like,
invisible forces.
but it's like I mean, what I experience in making physical stuff, which I obviously don't do nearly as much as you do, but like when I do it, is that it always has, there's like a hero's journey in every physical
Yeah.
thing that you make, right? Because yeah, you come in, you're like, okay, I have a plan of how to do this, and then I try and go and execute it, and it's never quite what you think. Like the conflict of the material is very real, and you go through that conflict and you wrestle with that conflict and you come out the other side with something that isn't exactly what you thought it was, but it's like just the sheer fact of completing it. I mean, in some cases it's more of a success than others, but in every case it's a success to actually get through to completion. And so
Yeah.
like, but the thing I was wondering about, which I still am not sure about based on what you're saying, is like, I think of the systems of drawing, measuring, milling, you know, and so on. Like all of our, like the technology around, your compass, your story stick, your, whatever, angle grinder, like those things are these like emergent, like they are them in themselves in a way like works of art that are byproducts of the making of other works of art, whether they're
Yes.
art or engineering or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so, uh, I guess I'm just trying to ask like whether like how you like evolve those two things in parallel, right?
Mm.
Or whether that actually is part of how you're thinking about what you're trying to make. Is it that you're like solely focused on, I have some concept of what I want this thing to feel like at the end, and I will just like find whatever tool I need to just get there, and I don't really think about the actual process, or is it the other, or is the process changing too?
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yes, I have in the last couple of shows, so over the course of the last like 4 years or something, I have gotten very into building fixtures for myself. Uh, I am not capable of like totally making my own tools, but yes, I am conscious of like pretty much all the processes that go into making them. It's like every time I pick up like a piece of whatever, like, like a file, like I know exactly like how they cut the
Hmm.
things and like that this is turned and like this thing is spun and like blah blah blah. Like I think about like how my tools are made. But the one way that I've being on the trash man, it's maybe loud. The one way that I uh have tried to sort of get a grip on like bridging the gap between me, the operator, and then the sculpture at the end has been making like fixtures or whatever. Like,
Right. Yeah,
like
like
a lot of like plywood trash that has like,
yeah,
like this is my
yeah, I
this
love,
is my thing for cutting sections of circles that I
yeah,
bend and it has a
yeah.
center. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I definitely make weird fucking tools. But like I see what you're getting at. I want to know how this relates to Urbit more.
Well, I think the thing for me, like the main insight for me at some point a long time ago, or like a primary thing that I thought about a lot was basically that like, and yeah, your concept of the artist as this sort of solely in pursuit of beauty or the sublime is interesting here, but like that like that periods of culture, in both the way that people thought and the way that they lived, were determined in large part by the tools that they used. And major changes in sort of foundational tools uh, had like huge downstream effects on society at large. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think for me it was like, oh, that's like the biggest point of leverage is like what are the tools that people use to make things, not like making things. It's like what are the tools that people use to make things. And the interesting thing about tools is that they're authorless, right?
Yeah.
There is no author. Like no one cares who made the compass. Like no one knows, it's impossible to know because they're like things that are like hidden in like the collective consciousness basically. And I think that's also like what architecture basically is. Like the ancient architect was just trying to unearth something about the way that people wanted to live together. That's like the job of the architect is just to be like, oh, we're already doing this thing. It's going to be obvious when we have this. It's not usually like a top-down effect, really.
Yeah, it's
It may
bottom up.
be pretty much, yeah. I mean, I think even in the case of um, like uh, uh, like religious or sacred architecture really broadly, like I think that's still like people want a place of worship where they can experience the sublime. And like they're creating that already, if you, whatever, like you can look at, societies without advanced building technology and you're still creating these like ceremonial spaces or something, right?
Mhm.
But that's a rabbit hole. Like, I think it's just like, yeah, you're kind of like trying to see something that people want and materialize it in a way that is systematic. And so then, yeah, I think I always loved, like, I always felt like, say, like Sol LeWitt was like a good crystallization of like that mechanism, right? Of just saying, hey, what if we just say this is the mechanism
This is the
and
tool.
yeah, this is the tool, and then you can see its multitude of possible outputs, um, just to be able to be conscious of like this phenomenon of like if I make a thing, then I can see its effects. So I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm just curious about. And some artists are more conscious of this, like than others, like this kind of like extreme, like uh, fixation on like on process. But I think the thing is that there are things that tools cannot do, right?
Ye-
And so the interesting thing to me is like, what is the tool not capable of doing? Because that's what the next tool will be, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
This makes me think of how in the last like year or two, I think because I've just been building a lot of stuff like all at once, at some point you kind of like lose your sense of self or like your individual within like the muck of like the mess and the shit, and like you fall away and you're just like part of the mess. And when that happens, when you start to really get like fluent or like fluid with the materials and the tools, they're not really tools anymore. They're just like an extension of your body. And so now in my like present state, I actually feel like what my real tools are like they're like mental. My real tools are like my ethic. Like that's the thing that I've been super conscious of trying to like tweak and adjust and kind of like refine so that when I set out to make something, um, it's as precise as it can be. It's as
Hmm.
like like the design or like the idea is as precisely manifested into form as I can. Like how to get what I'm imagining in my head,
Hmm.
like because when you're an artist, you just make shit up out of nothing. So it's like I have this weird blob in my head, but if I can refine my own system of like ethics that I
Hmm.
work by, then
It's really ethics though, or is it just process and
no, it's like it's actually like the laws I create and abiding by them.
like
Like
what?
like uh never use a fastener just because it works without questioning if there's a better one,
Hmm.
right? Like that would be like an obvious one. And then a
Hmm.
second one would be um like a more broad one would be is this use of ornament uh
Hmm.
in is it absorbing the viewer's eye or is it reflecting the viewer's eye and
Hmm.
bouncing it back into their own head?
Hmm.
Because what I want to do is I want to absorb their eye and let their eye like move freely around this form so that they get lost in the observation and they actually arrive at something um, that is objectively outside themselves
Hmm.
so that they can actually see, right? Because I want to teach people how to see stuff that they are unable to see because of like all manner of sort of like bullshit and filtration in front of them. But the
Hmm.
way that I can get closer to achieving that I set out to do is by sort of preemptively trying to live an ethical life. I don't mean in society, I mean as an artist. Like hold
Well, yeah,
my
I don't think you're
accountable.
talking about ethics, but I know what you mean.
No,
Like
like
you're t
at like action, responsibility for the action, like
Sure.
decision making, like, it's like a monk or something. Like
I
they live
understand.
by
Yeah.
like
It's a framework. Like part of it is ethical, part of it is practical, part of it is maybe more like I'm saying it's just more it's bigger than what than ethics per se. Because part of what you're talking like is also has to do with how to actually make the thing, and then other parts of it have to do with how to think about form, right? I mean, you're just talking about your own internal, it's almost like the internal mechanics of going about making the work, right? Like
yeah, but
I
that's the
think
thing that I really can like control.
do you want any, would you actually want anyone else to know what it was though?
What is
Like how you think about all of that. Like if you could just give that away, would you give it away?
like if I could like
Yeah,
pluck
yeah,
it, a hair out
yeah.
of my head. That's a great question. I think again to just be transparent about my own like immaturity. No, not right now. It's my secret sauce. But but I hope that when I'm like sort of like more wise, like old and wise, that it will be my job as a mentor to teach other people how to see in exactly that same way. I mean,
Yeah,
I feel like I owe a lot of the way I think about form and life and art making to my mentor, Nikki, who you know.
yeah.
And I think that she would probably agree that when she was younger, she wasn't even in a position to, because I also know that I'm probably wrong about a lot of stuff, so I'm not really ready to share. But I
I
think that
understand.
maybe by the end of my life, I might be like closer to like having something that could be like really valuable to other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the thing, I think about two things. So I think about um, my hazy memory of the movie Memento. Do you remember Memento?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, which I always remember as being this idea that like, if you plant the seed of something and forget it, it can grow to into something that you didn't intend, basically, right? And so, like, which for me was always like this. Uh, it's easy. Like, I mean, I think, now I'm like, I guess I should go rewatch the movie. But regardless of whether it's not whether it's in the movie or not, I remember that being this trigger for me, thinking like, oh, if you don't have like systems for like archiving basically like your own thinking, then it can be very dangerous or like you can get lost basically. Like you can really lose the thread of like what progress means, like whether it's for you internally or like as a group,
Hmm.
right? Um, and the other thing I often think about, especially when looking at art and especially ancient art, is that there's such a difference between the output, like the thing, like the sculpture, and yeah, the internal, the ethos or the framework or the pathos, whatever, like the intellectual framework that went into making the thing. And we read history like through these monuments, but the reality of culture is that it's not about the made referent, right? It's about all the stuff that people talked about and shared and
Get
went through and figured out like together on the road to the thing, you know?
yeah.
And that stuff is gone, like it's lost, you know.
Yeah. Like
Uh,
what is it in Blade Runner? Like Tears in the Rain. I think about that like all like how did they think about like building the pyramids? And I'm just like tears in
yeah.
the rain. Like
Well, I mean, that's it's like you want to know what Urban's about. That's what Urban's about.
yeah. No, I totally get it. I love that. I think that's really beautiful. See? Beauty. It
Yeah,
resonates. It's
yeah,
humming.
yeah. It's definitely. I mean, that was like that's like the. Do you remember Ramo Gudieri or whatever? He used to
Mm,
give like he's like I don't know. I've never like tried to Google him. Maybe he's famous. I have no idea. But he used to give lectures. Um, and I remember this whole lecture
at
that he gave where he was like, "What's that?"
at
At
our
school, yeah,
school. Oh,
yeah. Um, and he's just like a visiting, yeah, like he's like friend of Gersten's or something, like just show up um, and I remember him having this whole thing about like, why can't I talk to Plato?
Yeah, dude.
Why? Yeah.
Brutal.
Super
I
brutal.
know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I'm talking to Plato. Like I go to the beach and I start like talking to my I like look out onto like the empty horizon and I like start really
Uh,
thinking about form or something and this like fundamental place where like the chaotic sea like touches the earth and I'm like, yeah, I'm talking to Plato. What's up, dude?
well,
But I
sure.
really
I
need to
mean,
talk
but
to
it's crazy,
myself.
right? Like if you think about like, okay, so sure, you can, all right, the artist is in a lifelong pursuit of building something that is beautiful. The engineer is in pursuit of building something that is, well reasoned and internally consistent or efficient. Um, but in all of we have this like internal drive to like produce output, right?
Mhm.
And sort of like over the course of our lives, we transmit our way of working in this informal way like to other people, and that's culture. But culture is gone. It's like the most important thing that we make, the most important thing that like binds humanity together is also like the most invisible thing. And so we have lots of ways in which we think we are enshrining culture, we are preserving culture, and there are obviously many different, all this multitude of different cultures, subcultures, microcultures, macro culture, whatever. But and everyone has different systems for doing this, or I mean, that's some version of oral history, written history, visual history, whatever. But so much of our like, I mean, certainly in the world that we like in the academic background we come from, but also I think in broadly in like, I don't know, whatever, like Western culture, it's all about like making, it's like material, it's such an intensely materialist culture. It's like make a thing,
Mhm.
right? But it's like, well, but if you only make things, like what happens to like the things that like the stuff that actually binds all these people together, right? And like keeps them able to even make things. And yeah, I always think like we just like have no consciousness of that. It's like not even it's weird.
But that's something that like Urbit can solve for, right? Is being
Kind of.
like a beautiful system of archiving the forces that shape culture.
I mean,
Um,
I think I would, yeah, so I thought I definitely like one of the attractions working on Urbit was this idea that you would just have like a permanent cultural archive. Like, okay, I can't talk to Plato, but like, it would be at least cool to see like what he did every day or something, or it would be amazing if you could see the context within which like history actually happened. So you could understand like the multiple perspectives. There's nothing like reading multiple biographies, like understanding a
yeah.
point in history from different perspectives. And we get some of that with the internet actually already. I think people don't even appreciate how like crazy that is, and also how sad it is when
Totally insane. When you have like
it's
30 tabs open and you're like,
yeah,
like,
yeah, but a lot of that content, as fragile as it is, still
yeah,
will exist, right? So even if you just go back and like read, you can like read the state of the world as it exists like 5 years ago, and you can actually read it. The tragic thing is that there are holes in it, so it's like I'll go back and try and like open a link that I should save whenever it's gone, and that stuff's already gone. So sure, like it will definitely be a transformative thing if the whole history of the world is just written in real time. It's like rewindable, replayable. Like it's like a totally different like way of living, basically, I think. Um,
yeah. I wonder though, like, just devil's advocate a little bit, like if like the hole in the story or like the lack of like
yeah,
the fact that like history is like escaping you at every second that you're alive is also like part of the force that drives us all to continue filling it. Like
yeah,
I was having this conversation with a friend of mine about um, this app that is supposed to put okay, you know how like in the music industry you get like royalties when your song is played on Spotify?
yeah, yeah.
Like so in the visual art world, like you don't get royalties every time someone like
Sells your
gazes
piece.
upon an image of
Oh,
your
oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
so like there's like some dude or probably like multiple people who are like trying to be opportunistic about this situation and want to put like some kind of thing on the blockchain that's like a record of every time
sure,
art changes hands
yeah,
or like every sale, every resale, every auction and every like maybe like use of the image of it. And
yeah,
I'm sort of like almost like spiritually against it because I feel like it's the mystery that makes art exceptional and culture too. Like to some degree, like it's the the mystery and that which you do not know, like that makes it yeah, exceptional to just like regular stuff. Like I
I
don't I don't
understand.
I don't want to talk about like art as like a commodity because that's a stupid conversation, but like artwork is evaluated like for price in a way that is fucking arbitrary, pretty much, right? And like that's everyone's big complaint with it is like, why is this painting that is excellent worth like $5 at the fucking Goodwill, and this painting by this like hip artist in New York is worth $100,000? This makes no sense. Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
But the point is the kind of chaotic, arbitrary nature of it and the mystery behind why it is evaluated the way it is
yeah,
what drives the mystique around it. So it's like kind of, I don't know,
sure.
it's a weird, it's a double-edged sword with the idea of like archiving culture or archiving history or anything, is that maybe it's interesting to us because we don't know it and because we want to put the puzzle pieces back together. It's sort of a weird thing.
No,
I
I
keep this.
understand. I don't think anyone's ever gonna lack desire to constitute like their own sense of progress. Like it's almost like the foundational like Western idea is we are going to, you know, un, unendingly question what progress is, right?
Mhm.
Like within ourselves and within all of this multitude of different communities that we like live alongside. The um, the thing that, and I guess my claim would be, in a world of connected media or connected technology, when you have the ability to sort of continuously record, publish, basically capture like the state of the world, um, it, uh, it just sort of like doesn't make sense for that to be, um, or it doesn't, well, in its current state, right? Like there are holes in that history that are just like a random consequence of like a company going out of business or something like that.
Mhm.
And that doesn't make sense. And my conjecture, I guess, is that the existence of that like connected, that all these media, like different modalities for us to connect with each other, um, are born out of like a very real thing, which is that people want to be connected across, from disparate places and to be able to archive, some whatever they were thinking about in different ways. And so I think my simple conclusion is like, well, make that a tool for people, like make that a reliable, like high trust tool. That doesn't like solve the problem of progress. Like that doesn't solve for people like why is one thing better than another, but it gives you like a foundation. Like think of it this way, like there was a who wrote Paradise Lost? Milton,
Milton.
right? Yeah. So I always remember like people. There was, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but like one of the things that Milton was like, well, he was famous for, I think, maybe I'm thinking of someone else, is that he had like read everything known to man. Like he
Cool.
was basically like a total like completist. And at that time, I mean, of course he hadn't actually, but everything he could get access to,
For
and
like
it's like
15 books back then.
yeah, exactly. It was probably more like 500 books or something, but whatever. Like he read them all, right? And so he's just like, I get it. I know everything.
So
uh,
cool.
this is probably not remembering this clearly, but there's certainly a period of history in which that's possible, right? You can just like know. And um, that I think we live in this age of like no one can say it's fine to say here I don't know this thing, but I do know this thing. And I feel like we live in an age of like you can't tell the difference,
Yes.
basically, right? And so I'm just saying it would be nice if people could just say, look, I don't care about all this other stuff. But I'm gonna draw a line around this. It's a legible line, and this is the thing. This is the community that I care about, and this is the body of knowledge that is relevant to me.
Mhm.
Um, and no one knows the difference. Like no one can tell the difference anymore because
Mhm.
everything is like uh, just a kind of like constantly shifting foundation of information. Like you just like don't know where it's coming from or who decided what was important at what point. It's just a huge mess. It's
This
pretty.
impulse to like remove the foundation beneath like things is such a demented impulse, I feel like
Well, in this case, no one removed the foundation. It's just an accident. I mean, all this stuff is just a
no,
total accident. What
I
do you
think
mean?
it's not as old. I think it is. I think thinking about like building shit and like form in that way is like this is like fucking perverted. Like when
What do
okay,
you mean?
my loan, okay, my student loan, it's like very small student loan because like we went to free school, but I have a tiny little student loan that I pay off like little bits
Yeah.
at a time. And every fucking month I get a letter in the mail that is like, your loan like now belongs to Sally Mae. Your loan
Yeah.
now belongs to so and so. Your loan now belongs to da da. It's like this impulse to like constantly shift responsibility foundation is that is like an ethical problem. And it creates shitty aesthetics. And the shitty aesthetic leads to shitty ethics. This is what I'm talking about. It's like on the internet. Now here I'm gonna be like on computer. Like I don't know shit about computer, but like I get the feeling that like every time the software updates, like the rug has been pulled out from under me, and now I have to like learn a bunch of new bullshit, or like whatever, like fucking at work, like we use like a billion types of Google Suite stuff, and like for no reason that I can figure out every like some random amount of days, like 18 days or something, I have to like make new passwords. And then like you have to do that on like one password. And then like one password on your phone is like fucked up on the computer. And like I like live my life on like post-its and like I write on chalk on the table. Like
Well,
I
look,
get
I think like
but my point is this impulse to have like a shitty foundation for like the entire built environment has like bled over into the internet, and the internet is like how we like function in society now to like pay our bills and like not have debt and like whatever, like do our fucking job and all these things, and it's like it's fucking grotesque.
well,
Like
that's what I was trying to say in a way, or what I was referencing early. I'm saying the existence of all this stuff and our complete dependence on it is actually a really good indicator that it's just like an essential tool. Like it's a submergent tool. It's like a thing that people know they need. They don't have to think about it. It's just like totally obvious. And so the state of affairs, like the software that we use today, is just the best thing you could come up with as quickly as possible, to get like as much sort of like market share or whatever, like to just be as successful as you could be as quickly as you could be.
mhm.
And yeah, it just fucking sucks because it's early. And so, yeah, obviously our approach is like, well, if you thought about it differently, like if you thought seriously about it, you would come up with a different system that would satisfy, that would be exceptionally high trust. That would be like, you would, if you could like put an Urbit like inside a sandwich and eat it, you would. You wouldn't even think about it because like it's like it's the most trustworthy thing in the world. It's like I don't
Yeah,
like worry about my furniture, right? Like my furniture is not gonna like make me log in again or whatever. Like it's
yeah,
like it would just be this totally mundane, like completely familiar thing. Like
yeah.
just it would just disappear.
Trust is like the result of belief, and I think in order to generate like belief and trust and like faith in a material thing or a product or an idea or anything, you have to provide a sound um like set of like laws basically. I mean, like
Yeah,
that
that's
to
true.
me that's what's interesting about Urbit is that it is sort of like shamelessly like lawful but very free.
Yeah, that's definitely, yeah, that's, well, but
Like
that's
that's
like, I mean, these two things are pretty connected in a way, right? Like, it's like, I think that's like any really exceptional like work, even like a work of art or work of architecture. And I think it's also true of like engineering, incredible engineering feats is like the more taught that they are, like the more taught that like the systems are that are used to make the thing, the more that you can trust it because
yeah,
you aren't like worried about like, no, I don't know, like I'm not sure if this thing is like working correctly. Um, and yeah, that's definitely like the idea is that you could do that like to a computer. We'll see.
I looked up I before this conversation I brought into my studio the my etymological dictionary.
Yeah.
It's this is the best one to get, but it's written in 1950 or something. So I tried to look up the etymological definition of computer, and it wasn't in there.
I mean, in 19, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's so recent. I think that's like, I'm like, this is
It's an
not, I
older
mean, it's
word.
like
I
seven.
just think it wasn't like because like an etymological dictionary would be so fucking long if you had every word in it. It would
Okay,
be like
sure, fine.
so. I
I mean,
think because when I looked it up online, it said 14th century Latin, one skilled in reckoning, uh, in one
one who
skilled in
computes.
calendrical reckoning, which I thought was really
I don't
cool.
even know what that is.
Reckoning time,
Oh,
calendar.
This is like the connection between astrology and computing,
Yes.
basically. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's wild. I mean,
Yeah.
computers do basically keep time. Ooh, that's good. Okay,
Yeah.
let's call it. It's been an hour.
That's
Let's
really
leave
good.
it
Hot
there.
take.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh,
uh, I gotta think about that for a while.
yeah, here, 14th century Latin, one skilled in